Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the Intimacy and Emotional Connection webinar. My name is Crystal Reynolds, and I am the Director of Communications for the Family Institute at Northwestern University, where we, through research, education, and therapy, practice relationship-based behavioral healthcare and are committed to strengthening and healing children, adolescents, families, and individuals from all walks of life. On today's panel, we have our moderator, Rebecca Coopersmith, who is a licensed clinical social worker who works with adult individuals and couples. Ms. Coopersmith specializes in sexual health, romantic relationships, family of origin concerns, relational trauma, and anxiety. In addition, she is an AASECT certified sexuality educator. Thank you for joining us. We are also joined by Dr. Heather Chamberland, who is a licensed clinical psychologist who works with adult individuals and couples. She has specialized training in evidence-based practices and for couples. Through her passion for integrating research into practice, she focuses on the implications of romantic relationships on an individual's health and the impact of health and disease on couples functioning. And finally, we are joined by Lesley Fisher, who is a staff therapist, licensed marriage and family therapist, and supervisor who is passionate about working with families and couples. She is particularly interested in helping couples navigate life transitions, emotional distress and disconnection, and acute and chronic health issues. Thank you all for joining us, and I'll turn it over to you, Rebecca.
Okay, thanks, Crystal, for the introductions. So let's just start by trying to define intimacy in relationships. And I'll throw something out there, that I think I would define intimacy both emotionally and sexually pretty similarly, that it's how you balance closeness and separateness. And I find that separateness is a little counterintuitive to a lot of people, but I like to explain it that you need oxygen to fan a fire. So Lesley and Heather, I'll bounce it to you. How would you define intimacy, and what do you think is important for building a strong connection?
To me, intimacy is feelings of shared closeness and belonging. When I think of intimacy, it doesn't necessarily need to contain a physical component, but it can. When we're intimate with another, whether that is emotional or through physical engagement, the result of that is feeling deeply connected with another person. The intimacy creates a space of vulnerability, and it allows partners a sense of being really seen by the other, giving a sense of emotional safety and security. And so it feels like when our partner has our backs, it gives us a sense of confidence. And the more that we're emotionally connected we are, the more securely attached we are, and the more autonomous we can be, which, Rebecca, I think you were mentioning is like that idea of oxygen fanning the flame.
Yeah, there's so many important points in there, Heather. And the one that's really sticking out to me is the vulnerability piece. Can you talk briefly more to that vulnerability piece and how you see that as so important?
That vulnerability is about letting your guard down and showing all the parts of yourself. Lesley, I know that when we talked about this, you mentioned something really interesting about showing the good and the bad.
Yeah, I can talk about that too, because the way I see intimacy is it's about sharing the best and the worst of ourselves. And if you can't see me, I'm air quoting best and worst, because it's often about our perceptions about what makes us good, valuable, lovable, or not lovable, the parts of us that we don't want to be seen. And when we share the joys of life, when we feel pleasure together, when we laugh together, when our partners love about us what we love about ourselves, we feel deep validation. We feel good, we feel cared for. But on the flip side, when we share our vulnerabilities, our sensitivities, the parts of us that don't feel pretty, the feelings like sadness, anxieties, fears, frustrations, the parts that we think won't be as pretty or likable, when we share those and we're still cared for, I think that's what really builds connection. And so I think intimacy is about sharing the highs and the joys of life, having a companion for those parts, but it's also about being seen, being cared for, even in the harder parts of life.
I think that's a great definition. I really appreciate how you highlight how important it is for us to even show the parts of ourselves that maybe we don't even like and that we're struggling with, and how that really kind of can build intimacy.
Yeah, and I think probably one of the things we'll be talking about today is we need to feel safe. We need to feel like it will be um, okay, that we'll have a good response to sharing those pieces. And that's what makes some of this really challenging to open up in that way.
Yeah, definitely. So Lesley, talk to me about what obstacles that you see couples encounter when they're trying to deepen their emotional bond.
Sure. So I think one of the major obstacles can be a fear of being turned down if we reach out for connection, whether we're opening up about something emotional, we've had a rough day, we want to share an accomplishment that we had today, we want to say that we've really missed our partner, or we're really disappointed by something that they did. It can feel really risky to reach out. And I know that we've used the word vulnerable already today. And when I think about vulnerable, I think about risk. It's important to be seen when we're not feeling connected, when we're not feeling close. And it feels risky to reveal that, because what if my partner doesn't care? What if they get upset? What if they turn away? What if they get annoyed? What if they don't understand what this means to me? And sometimes that's worth protecting, and we don't do it. We pull away, we protect ourselves. I think part of what this can look like is becoming fixated on what we anticipate our partner's responses will be if we reach out to connect emotionally or sexually or any other way. And we start to anticipate it might be like that time before, or what if they're in a bad mood? What if I don't do it right? What if they're not feeling like they want to connect to me in this way? And then so sometimes we overcompensate for that. We come in really hot because it's really important to us, or sometimes we're anxious. So we pull back and we really don't approach, and then we don't get what we need. All because we're anticipating a response that doesn't feel caring and supportive to us. So yeah, I think those are some of the things that I
Yeah,
would say get in the way.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I think what you're saying is, we kind of get in our own way sometimes, that the things we do to try and protect ourselves and protect the relationship end up backfiring. So Lesley, kind of staying with this, what tips do you have for couples?
Sure. I think if you want to think about the ways that you initiate these moments of connection, think about finding the right time or place. So often bringing up a concern about emotional closeness. I didn't like the way that you said that. I miss you. We haven't been spending time together. Find a time that doesn't feel heated. Find a time that feels separate from the tension or the disconnection happening, just to lower defenses, make it easier to be approached. And we can use something called a soft startup, which is research by John Gottman. A soft startup is essentially coming into a conversation a little gentler, an invitation to talk about something. Can I ask you about something? Can I tell you about something that happened earlier? Do you have a few minutes? Rather than, I'm really annoyed with you right now, or I'm so stressed out, you always do this thing. And inviting a conversation can give us a better response, just setting the tone for what we want it to be. And then the other tip that I have that I think we'll get more into is be aware of what's going on when you're in these conversations. Understand what you're bringing to the table, understanding what your partner might feel in these moments, and allow yourself to have feelings.
These are great suggestions, and I would recommend any of those to the people who I see. Heather, what are your thoughts here?
Very similar to what Lesley was saying so beautifully. And I think that the themes of vulnerability are going to keep coming up throughout this conversation, because an intimacy really is synonymous with vulnerability. You cannot have true intimacy without that vulnerability being present. And so oftentimes couples come into relationships with past hurts, whether that be from attachment needs not being met in their family of origin, or just even past hurts from previous relationships. And so the way that I like to phrase this with clients is that these hurts can act like bruises. And when we are not showing up with vulnerability, we can press on each other's bruises. And so those bruises then create reactions that we see oftentimes, like defensiveness or criticisms. And we get these ruptures in the connection, and couples can get stuck in negative interaction cycles of blame, defend, and they really get stuck in those moments. And so if you notice that you're getting stuck in these cycles, it's really important to slow down interactions. I think Lesley mentioned this idea of self-awareness. It's really important to be aware of what you're bringing to the relationship. What are some of your past hurts, and how might they be getting played out in these cycles? Leading conversations with curiosity, going into why did you do this? That's automatically going to create feelings of defensiveness. It's like, oh, what are they saying? But if you come to your partner, I'm curious what this meant for you, that's going to create an environment of softness where you two can, or the partners can open up and have a different type of conversation. And lastly, trying to listen, and this is, I feel like, a big one, try to listen to understand versus listen to respond. A lot of people, when you're in a conversation, you're thinking of what you're going to say to your partner. Well, you're really missing the meaning then, and you're kind of just thinking about what you have to say, and you're missing the other person's experience. So if you can listen to understand, that helps really work on those rigid cycles.
If I can just build off of that, Heather, because I'm really interested in what you're saying, and it's making me think about how many people that I've met in therapy who get to a place in that cycle where they feel like my partner isn't giving me the benefit of the doubt anymore. My partner assumes that I'm judging them, or I'm upset at them, or I don't care about what they have to say. And I think it can be really helpful to remember that your partner's responses to whatever's going on is often protecting some vulnerability of theirs. Often an old wound or a bruise, like Heather is talking about, just the same way that some of your actions, whether you snap or whether you pull away, you need space, or you ask a million questions because you're anxious about something. We do things to protect our own vulnerabilities. And assuming that your partner is doing that too can go a long way in caring about what's going on beneath the thing that you don't like that they're doing or saying.
You both raise such good points. And what it makes me think about is kind of a spectrum. And if you had one end of the spectrum is protecting, and another end of the spectrum is vulnerability, and how I think you two are just kind of talking about how do you manage that? How do you balance it? How do you kind of not get to a place where you're so protecting that there's no vulnerability and thus no connection?
Yeah, and I have a lot of respect for the ways that people protect their vulnerabilities. And I think that we need to give ourselves and each other a little bit of grace for doing the things that we need to do when we feel alone, or we feel scared, or we feel misunderstood, or we feel judged. And it's the reward to letting somebody see what you're really feeling afraid of or what you're really craving is worth letting go of those defenses. But it's a complicated puzzle of both people trying to understand each other, trying to listen to understand, like Heather was talking about, and building more safety that if I open up, you'll be there for me.
Yeah, absolutely. So far we've been talking about how a couple can navigate this emotional connection, and we've been looking at it kind of from the couple standpoint. So let's look at it in a different direction now. So let's talk about how one's own personal emotional well-being is a factor and how that becomes a factor. And the way that I like to think about this is that first and foremost, we all need to be responsible for meeting our own emotional well-being and our own emotional needs. And I think that part of that is that no relationship can meet all of our needs, and we shouldn't ask it to, because if we're asking it to, we kind of set the relationship up for conflict because we're asking it to do something it can't. Or worse, we kind of set ourselves up for interdependence. Lesley, what are your thoughts here? How does emotional well-being impact a relationship?
Yeah, I'm listening right now to what you're saying about how people need to sort of balance taking care of themselves and allowing somebody else to be there for them, to help care for them. And if we expect our relationship to do all of our fulfillment, all of our companionship, all of our emotional support, physical comfort, sexual needs, then we're bound to feel that down because we're human. People make mistakes. Our partners have their own balance of needs, energies, capacities to give and be present for us. And we can give best to our partners when we feel taken care of ourselves. And so it is, I see it as a balance really between how do I care for myself and how do I give. Another level of that is how do I'll call it self-regulation or emotional regulation. How do I care for myself during times of stress? And then how do I reach out to, how do I be of support to my partner during those times as well? And I think it's really a balance. So I can say a little bit more about that too, because I think this makes it a little bit more complicated, because having a secure connection to our partner can give us some of the confidence and the security that we need to go out into the world and take care of ourselves. But this is what makes it complicated, is what comes first. Do I take care of myself? Do I reach out and ask for help from my partner? And really, it's sort of both things need to happen at the same time.
Heather, where are you on this?
Absolutely about the balance. We cannot ask others to do things for us that we cannot do for ourselves. And so when I think of this question, I go to the metaphor of the oxygen mask. And so, when you're on a plane and they tell you to put on your mask before assisting with others, well, this is very similar. You cannot take from your emotional bank account if it is empty. And so it is important to make sure that you are taking care of your own well-being in order to best support those around you.
I'd like to add something else too here about the idea of mental well-being and accountability, because I think we've talked a lot about self-awareness and understanding your own reactions to stress, to past experiences, to bruises, and how important it is to understand your own history so that you know why you're responding to something that your partner says or does. And I do think it's important. It's a part of mental well-being for us to take accountability of the impact that we can have on our own lives and relationships. That what we say contributes to how our partner feels, which contributes to the way that they respond to us, and on and on. But I want to be mindful about the word accountability, because sometimes people will hear accountability and they'll think, I don't want to be blamed for everything. I don't want to take full responsibility for what happens. I need to see that my partner cares about this too. That can be a huge part of building emotional intimacy, is wanting to see that your partner cares about you in the good times and the bad. So taking accountability and taking care of yourself does not mean letting go of having needs, needing support, feeling softness, feeling scared, feeling let down. It just means understanding yourself and understanding what you can do to impact the way that you're feeling and the way that your partner is feeling. It's meant to be more encouraging that you can do something about what's happening. You can understand yourself and your partner, but it's not if I own up to the way that I get impatient or the way that I pull away when my partner comes on too strong. It's not saying I can't have a reaction, I can't have a feeling. It's just understanding that that really hits me in particular, because I remember feeling the same way and I really don't like that. So taking accountability, I think, is an important part of this individual well-being that we're talking about.
I think that's a great point, that there needs to kind of be a bit of a balance, and part of this balance is individual accountability. Why do you think that's so tough for people?
That's a really good question. And I think part of it is about if it can feel like an admission or a confession, or it can feel like it's owning something is wrong with us. And I think we as therapists, and we come into this work and it's not that there's something wrong with you for feeling that way. It's rather that you're human, you have an emotion, you have an experience, but it can be really hard to identify something that might feel like a flaw. We can be afraid that our partners or somebody else won't care about us as much if we admit that we get overwhelmed and we want to pull away, or our frustration gets out of hand when we feel disconnected from each other. It can be embarrassing. It can feel shameful. Something's wrong with us and we want to hide it. The issue is that when we do, it further disconnects us from each other. And even if we're trying to do that for a good reason, I don't want to scare my partner. I don't want to push you away. So I'm not going to let you see the side of me that gets really feisty, or the side of me that gets really irritable. Our partners can sense that something isn't right, and that gets in the way.
Thanks. I think that makes a lot of sense, why it's just hard to take accountability and how scary it can be.
It can be very challenging to say I'm wrong. It's Lesley, like you said, coming to that conversation, admitting a flaw. I think it also makes it difficult when you feel wronged by the other person. And so it's basically saying that it was you versus me. And so we kind of see some scorekeeping that tends to happen, or who was the more wronged party. And it's really hard to let some of that go and take that accountability and say, you know what, I am 100% responsible for my 50% in this relationship.
That
I really
is,
like the way that you framed that.
yeah, I was going to say the same thing.
We haven't talked too much about the word shame Yeah, but I think when we think about intimacy and vulnerability, we have to mention the feeling of shame, which I see as different than feeling guilty, because guilty is about something that you did. Guilt is a healthy feeling. It makes us apologize for things. It makes us, work really hard to avoid things going wrong. But shame is about there's something wrong with me. I am bad. And that is often beneath a lot of disconnection and distress between members of a couple in a romantic or in a friendship, truly, because we're afraid of something being seen in us that won't be loved. And when that part is seen and we're loved, not despite that bad thing, but including that thing about us, that's what makes us feel better. But it's, shame is usually connected to something really risky to share.
To me, this also connects back to personal and emotional well-being. That, yes, it's important for us to share these parts in couples. I think the other half of it is that we have to work on accepting the things about ourselves that we feel shameful about, so that we're not inadvertently kind of getting into these dance moves, so to speak, that don't help the relationship, whether it's blame or defensiveness or all the things.
I like that a lot, that we need to find a way to care for ourselves and all of our parts, to then share them with somebody else. And believe that somebody else can care about us the way that we wish to be cared for.
Yeah. So let's move on here. So let's talk about advice for couples who might have differing wants or preferences when it comes to intimacy, and how couples might be able to kind of find a middle ground here. Heather, what are your thoughts?
This is a really good question. And I notice a lot of the struggle around couples who have different needs is finding a way to talk about them. And so it's really important to be able to set that stage. I mentioned before, like approaching the conversation with openness and putting aside defensiveness, creating a space where you can all be heard, and remembering that you're on the same team in these conversations. You are working towards something in the relationship. And so basically, if the relationship wins, you both win. Identifying your needs and preferences is the first part of being able to communicate them. And so for couples who struggle with identifying needs, I tend to frame this through love languages. And I want to acknowledge that there's a lot of love languages out there. There's not just the 5 that's been kind of the popular 5 that have been discussed. But for couples who struggle with this, I like to give them a common language around needs for them to understand what connection means to themselves and to the other person, as well as how it's expressed. And people tend to show care or love the way that they like to receive it. So for example, my love language might be acts of service and my partner's might be quality of time. When I want to feel close to my partner, I'm going to do so through acts of service, because that's how I feel seen in the relationship. However, if my partner really values quality time, it's going to create a sense of disconnection. They're not going to feel cared for because their needs aren't being met. And so this is where I see a lot of couples getting stuck, because they feel like they're trying so hard. Look at all that I'm doing for you. I tell you how much I care. I cook, I do all of these things, but they're just not getting it right. And they're not understanding why they're missing the mark. And so we can use this love language framework to help communicate our needs and preferences, as well as understand our partners. And so since I acknowledge that my partner, their needs are different than mine, I can hold them in mind next time, and make the effort to spend quality time, and vice versa. As well as if I know my partner has different needs than me, and I'm expressing it through my way, they can acknowledge that I'm making an effort. Even if it's not the way that they always want it, we definitely want to be showing up how they need to, but they can acknowledge, you know what, it's not the way that I would do this, but I do see that they are making the effort.
Heather, that's a great point. That I think what you're saying is if two people have different love languages, that things get lost in translation. That
Absolutely.
one person thinks, look at all the things I'm doing. And since the other person is needing something else, they don't notice it.
Exactly.
And then couples really go sideways.
If I can add one thing to that,
Yeah.
just from listening, I'm thinking about an observation that I've made is that we don't always see these differences until years or sometimes decades into a relationship. And we don't see it so much as something that we can learn to do for each other as much as something that's been lost. It used to be easier. We used to know, and it can be really overwhelming and scary to think, oh no, am I in this relationship where we don't like the same things, we connect over the same ways, but if we look at it as an opportunity to learn through the course of life and have conversations, then I think it can go a lot better.
Mhm.
Definitely. I can speak to this a little bit from a sexual standpoint where couples just have differing wants, needs for sex. And I think, first of all, Heather, you said something that I really also want to emphasize, not to blame. Because when one person starts blaming another, this becomes a barrier that couples really can't bridge the gap because they're blaming each other. And when people want different things in a relationship, first of all, that's normal. But second of all, it needs to be approached as a team. That all too often, one person blames the other. Well, you're not doing X, giving X, whatever. And blame happens, but it's more like the person who doesn't want to be doing these things. It's kind of like they've lost the car keys. They're not holding back. They have no idea where the car keys are. They don't know how to fix it. And thus, couples really struggle. So first and foremost, work together as a team when you're having differing wants and needs for intimacy. Beyond that, I would really encourage couples to think about ways that they can bring in touch in the relationship that doesn't necessarily have to lead to sex or intimacy or anything. Just ways that couples can enjoy touching each other. And that can be as simple as holding hands or, cuddling on the couch when you're watching TV. In addition to that, I would really encourage couples to reframe sex as pleasure. How can a couple bring in things into a relationship that feels pleasurable? Because this can really open doors to things that folks find more appealing, and it really can remove barriers for couples.
I'm so glad you brought in this aspect, Rebecca, because I think that this is also an important part of intimacy. In kind of where I go to is when people want to be physical with each other, what is the important part of it? What are they trying to get out of it? And a lot of times it has to do with feeling that sense of closeness, feeling that sense of connection in those moments.
I think you're totally right. Sorry, go ahead, Lesley. I see you want to say something.
That's okay. I noticed that when it comes to sex and physical intimacy, people can become really polarized and really stuck, not engaging in anything along the spectrum of physical touch, sexual and non-sexual, because they're afraid of the ways that it can go wrong and what it can lead to. And reframing the way that you're talking about, Rebecca, as sex as pleasure, non-sexual touch being pleasurable in and of itself, and removing the pressure of sex has to be this way, it has to be complete and full in whatever way it used to be, or one person wants it to be. Just being more flexible with that can relieve some of the pressure so that people can both show up to the table and get a little bit of what they're looking for and really find more common ground. But when there's pressure to engage in something that you don't want to do or that you're not in the mood for, then people tend to not even want to start. They don't even want to reach out. They don't want to initiate because they're afraid that they're committing to something that they don't necessarily want to do. Having conversations about all of the different ways that physical touch can be satisfying can open up a whole world of ways to connect in ways that both people value.
Right. Couples need to be able to go off script, so to speak. That if they don't want this one specific script, there needs to be something else that can be successful for the couple. And I think what you're getting at, Lesley, in part is how couples can get into a cycle when it comes to differing wants and needs for sex. That, you know, one person says no, the other person feels really rejected. And then the other person just avoids sex altogether because they don't want the other person to continue to feel rejected. And then things really spiral, and the problem is no longer sex, it's avoidance.
Yeah. And it's often connected, you know, we're talking about sex and physical connection, but you're also hinting at it hurts to feel rejected, whether that's the point of what's happening or whether it's just a byproduct of your partner taking care of themselves or protecting their own sensitive parts. And this goes hand in hand with emotional connection. We want to feel wanted, we want to feel cared for, we want to show that, and this can all become very precarious.
Yeah, definitely. It's easy to get off to the races, as I like to say.
I think it's valuable to talk about these things outside of when sexual intimacy is happening or an initiation goes wrong, because then you're already feeling vulnerable, you're feeling tense. When you talk about it when sex is off the table anyways, then it can feel safer to talk about your interests, your desires, the things you don't like, the things you want to try, don't want to try. It can feel a lot safer to get into those things outside of the heat of the moment.
Yeah, I think the heat of the moment is probably the worst time to talk about things.
Yeah, when you're already feeling activated, that's when any of these cycles will click into place.
Yeah. And I mean, the heat of the moment is already a really vulnerable moment. So it's yeah, it can be really challenging.
Yeah. And then building off that just a little bit, because I imagine a lot of our listeners right now are thinking about their busy lives, all of their responsibilities, all of their time is accounted for. When are they going to have these conversations? When are they going to connect? And I think that when we mention, being curious, asking questions, we think about doing that in small ways too, making it feel really approachable. Maybe we'll talk a little bit about that later on.
Yeah, we can circle back to that and talk about if we have any kind of quick pieces of advice or what have you. So let's kind of shift once again, and let's talk about a little bit about what you're saying, that when times get tough for couples, how do you two recommend that couples can maintain their emotional closeness and support each other?
Yeah, I can get into this a little bit because I think it's really not uncommon for life challenges to throw off our habits, our routines, the ways that we feel connected. And life changes, planned or unplanned, positive or scary, overwhelming, hard, can change the way that we connect each other. Even during positive life events, getting a new job that we've been aiming for, kids growing up and leaving home, and people become empty nesters. These changes can set the context for needing to relate to each other in a different way. So to give a sort of simple guidance, when things just feel simply we've gotten off track, it's been, we've gone through all of these life changes together, we've been a little bit more frustrated with each other, we can't seem to find each other in the mess of life, I would suggest that people go back to the beginning of what drew you to your partner in the first place. We can add to our image of our partner, our lovable, the person that we care about, admire, look up to. We can add to that all of the times that they've annoyed us, the times they've let us down, the things they don't understand about us, the things that they do that have nothing to do with us, and we can lose the piece of what connected them to us in the first place. And so even reminiscing or going back to what are those connections and finding them again can be useful, but sometimes that's not enough. Sometimes we feel really divided over life's challenges. Sometimes something has happened that it really creates more hurt and pain. There's been an infidelity, there's been a lack of trust, or something external. Somebody has lost a job, somebody has a new health issue that's causing a lot of stress. Then I think it's a lot about find those ways to cope with your own stress, and then find new ways to be curious about your partner and understand the news cycle. Be accountable for what you're bringing to the table and learn new ways of connecting. I think a lot about this is, I'll use the word respect here. And when I'm talking about respect, I mean sort of acknowledging the reality of how we respond to life's challenges. Respect your partner's coping strategies, respect your own coping strategies. Allow your partner to be stressed when life is stressful. Figure out what you take personally and what you don't take personally, and make space to understand what you and your partner need in those stressful times. Does your partner need a problem solver? Does your partner need a witness? Does your partner need a shoulder to cry on? Do they need some space so that they can sort of heal themselves before they feel strong enough to come back to you? And I think that doing some of those things can help us sort of navigate hard life challenges together. And then maybe one more, I don't know if this feels tangible, but it's a mindset that I think that we need to adopt when we go through life's challenges together, is about adopting a us versus the problem way of approaching things, because often when things go wrong in life, it's tempting to be divided over our different opinions, our different perspectives, to take things personally when our partner is upset. And sometimes it's not about us, it's about the job loss, the health issue, the whatever is going on. And so adopting a mindset of us against the problem can be a way to reunite yourself with your partner and find a way forward. And that does take into account the ideas of sometimes I need to compromise so that we can do this together. Sometimes I need to take a back seat because my partner's having a harder time than I am with this right now. Sometimes I'm the strong one, and so I have to do a little bit more of the caretaking, a little bit more of the practical responsibility in our family. So those are some ideas that I have.
Yeah, all good ideas. When you're talking, Lesley, that actually reminded me a little bit of what you were saying, Heather, with love languages. That sometimes, we can really help each other and connect to each other through these love languages. And about how sometimes we give in our love language, but our partner needs something else. And I think that's kind of a little bit of what you're saying, Lesley, that sometimes our partners need something different than what we're needing or what we're thinking.
Yeah, and sometimes it's different than what we knew they needed 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 15 years ago. And if it's different than what we need, it can feel really threatening to the bond. It can feel like we're so far apart, I don't know them anymore, but it's also, we can slow down and we can learn what's needed now, how it's different.
So one last quick question. What are your go-tos for each of you for fun, meaningful activities that couples can try and do together, potentially outside of therapy. My favorite is a 6-second kiss and a 20-second hug. What about you, Heather?
I'm a big fan of practices of gratitude and just celebrating the wins. And so when you're seeing the efforts, when you're seeing those changes made and it means something, point that out, highlight those efforts. I have a couple who started this ritual of connection, Rosebud Thorn, and it really just creates that space to be intimate, but it's not a lot of pressure in because it's a structured activity. And so I think it builds it right into a meal time or just time together. So I'm a big fan of that one.
Yeah, building off of finding the little moments, and the little moments might not be the same little moments that they used to be, but finding a few minutes at the beginning or the end of each day just to check in, sending each other emails or messages, keeping a shared journal just to check in with each other when you're really busy. Figuring out the things that you used to connect over and doing them in new ways. If you used to go to a lot of concerts together, but now you're too busy to go to concerts, listen to music together, watch YouTube videos of your favorite concerts, right? Find the ways to share joy and to connect over the neutral and harder parts of life in small ways. You just really have to make time for it, even if it's 5 minutes a day. It's a hard commitment, but making time for it pays off.
Great suggestions. So we have a little less than 10 minutes left, so we can do some Q&A at this point.
Thank you all. That was a really great discussion. We've had a few questions come in the Q&A and a few that were pre-submitted. So we'll start with the ones that came in live. First, some advice if you are taking the soft approach, but you still worry that your partner is anxious from past relationship criticism.
That's a really good question, because I do think a soft startup is important, but it's only setting the scene. And part of my immediate responses to this question is your partner probably is going to have anxiety if they've been hurt before, whether it's in this relationship or another relationship. And so part of our goal is to not eliminate any of that, but understand it. So I would suggest, outside of the moments that you want to bring something up yourself, be curious about that. How can I talk about something that I'm feeling in a way that makes you feel safer? What was it that made you feel that way in the past? How can we work around this? And then in the moment, using things like I statements, which is essentially speaking from your own experience, instead of saying, you do this, you forgot that, you never listened to me. It's saying, I miss hearing about your day, instead of, you never talk to me after your work day. Really focusing on sharing yourself instead of pointing out what your partner is doing can go a long way. That being said, if your partner's really feeling like they have a soft spot for something, they might take something personally. They might hear you say, I miss you sharing your day with me, and they think, oh no, I'm doing something wrong, I'm letting my partner down. So that's when being curious outside of this and working through some of it separately than these moments can help the moments go a little bit more smoothly. There's more of a foundation for trust. We've talked about this before. We've talked about how we can listen to each other, that sort of thing. I hope that answers the question.
Yes. We had a related question that came in pre-submitted. How do you not let your past relationship trauma affect your current relationship?
That's a great question. And to me, that's kind of part of emotional well-being, to understand, what happened, as this created sensitivities, and to really work hard to kind of separate out when you're having one of these moments, that was then, this is now.
Yeah, and I think this is a part where we give ourselves grace and we say, I've been hurt before. And so I've built up this way of trying to protect myself from being hurt again. And so these alarms go off. It says, warning, get out of this, or fight and get it to stop. And I think that that's the part that we need to respect, that we're doing the best we can to not be hurt. But like Rebecca said, having awareness of this is what I do when something starts to poke at that bruise of mine. And I can understand that I might feel the way that I did back then, but it's not necessarily the same thing. It's not happening again. And when it's hard to sit with that and hold, this is scary for me because I've been burned before and I'm going to try anyways, that might be a sign that we need to do a little bit more reflection on what is it that is weighing on me? What's hard? Is there still something that exists between me and my partner that doesn't feel healed that we need to go back to? Because it's too hard to talk about the here and now because I'm still feeling so much pain from the past.
Thank you. The next question is, we all love our phones and our iPads. Do you have any advice for when technology gets in the way of intimacy? So for example, iPads in the bedroom, you're on your phone a lot. If you just talk a little bit about that.
All the time. It gets in the way all the time. I mean, it's when you have a device or something between you and another person, it's going to create a wall between the two of you. And so try and keeping those phones out of conversation. If you're having an important conversation with your partner, put the phone away, put the tablet away. If you're trying to engage in any sort of physical contact, put the phone away. There's not a need for technology in those moments because your partner is reaching out to you to connect. And so we want to keep the distractions to a minimum.
To me, I kind of sometimes wonder, in some cases, is that a symptom rather than the cause? Are people going to their phone because something's happening in the relationship that makes connection avoided?
Yeah, it can be almost, you're saying it can be a little bit of a protection to be a little removed because the TV's on or I'm on my phone. It gives us it's something to focus on besides the vulnerability of just looking and having a conversation.
Right. And it's so acceptable to kind of be attached to your phone these days.
Yeah. I wonder if what's behind part of this question too is it can be really, it can go south if you're asking your partner to put away their phone and just have a conversation with you, which is often what some of us want is look at me, pay as much attention to me as you are your video games, your phone, your social media, whatever it is. And saying you're on your phone so much. We used to connect every night in bed and now you're on your phone every night is going to feel like a criticism. And so coming at it from a way of, I miss the way that we used to cuddle in bed and talk about our day. I wonder if we can make sure we have 10 minutes every night, before we go to bed, after we put our phones away, to do that. And acknowledge that I think we are all of the opinion that technology is getting in the way of connection, but there might be some people who don't want to let it go, who it's part of how they feel connected to the world or other people. And so it's really making room for both. But coming at it as a request, I feel really close to you when we're sitting in the backyard and we're having a drink and we're not scrolling through our phones, we're talking to each other, is better than I hate that you keep taking your phone out when we're trying to have a nice night together. So making it about your wish, your desire for closeness.
And I will acknowledge it's a lot easier sometimes to scroll on your phone to finish that show when you're feeling burnt out. You had a full day with work, maybe you have kids. The last thing that you want to do necessarily is put forth that effort. And so it's really easy to get into those ruts in terms of just scrolling versus spending that time with somebody else. And so really being intentional about times that you can connect.
And some people, you know, going back to the idea of differing desire levels and different ways of feeling connected, some people will really enjoy what we might call parallel play, sitting on the couch together at the end of a long day, doing your separate things, but being together might feel good to somebody. It might not feel really satisfying all of the time or to the same extent as the other person. So it's finding ways of doing both.
I think we have time for one last question. So how do I get my partner to be more open to couples counseling to enhance emotional connection?
This is a really tough one because a lot of times the fear is I'm going to be blamed in couples therapy, that basically you and the therapist are going to sit there and just point out all my flaws. And so it's really being able to come at it from a relational standpoint of these things that maybe were working before are not working now. And I want to create something new and different with you. I want to be able to reconnect with you. And so coming to them with a vulnerability of this relationship is so important to me and I care about you so much that I want to succeed with you. And so if you frame it that way of, you know, this isn't all about your flaws and we're here to just list off everything you do wrong in the relationship, I think that that's going to create a stage where the other person's a lot more open to attending counseling. They may not be 100%, but also, you know, you can meet with a therapist and see if you're a good match. Just because you meet with somebody doesn't mean you're locked into the relationship. And so it's really also about finding a good match and who you both feel comfortable sitting with.
Great. Thank you. Thank you again. This was a really, really great discussion. And thank you all for joining us. If you know anyone that is in need of support, please visit our website at family-institute.org to book an appointment online. Thank you all again and have a great afternoon.